Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Masters of the Universe Revelation Season 1? Stick around and find out. I think that's roughly how the theme for the live-action Masters of the Universe movie went, but I'm not sure. It's been a while. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Play Productions. This is my uncut review of Masters of the Universe Revelation. The synopsis on IMDb reads, "A radical return to Eternia. Revelation is a direct sequel series to the classic era of Masters of the Universe. Featuring fan favorites He-Man, Orko, Cringer, and Man-at-Arms, the story pits our heroic warriors and guardians of Castle Grayskull against Skeletor, Evil Lyn, Beastman, and the vile legions of Snake Mountain. But after a ferocious final battle forever fractures Eternia, it's up to Teela to solve the mystery of the missing Sword of Power in a race against time to prevent the end of the universe. Her journey will uncover the secrets of Grayskull at last. This is the epic He-Man and the Masters of the Universe saga fans have waited 35 years to see." Well, maybe not this fan in particular. I think every fan kind of has their own things they remember about certain properties and what they would like to see them become in the future. This moves in the direction of what I would like, but not quite full on in the direction I would like. Still, I was fairly happy with it. I loved He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I don't remember watching the show a ton, ironically, but I collected a lot of the toys and spent a lot of time playing with the toys. I still have Castle Grayskull, which you might be able to see in the background, and I passed down my toys to my boys. They have played with Masters of the Universe stuff. They didn't watch this with me, although, you know, that might happen at some point. But anyway, it's not that I would describe myself currently, or since becoming an adult, as a Masters of the Universe fan, but what stuck with me that I really enjoyed was the aesthetic of the world, that kind of Conan the Barbarian type of fantasy world, but with a lot more magic, and then also a bunch of technology, sci-fi stuff thrown in. I've always loved when fiction blends equally those two elements, and it's really not near as common as I would like it to be. And so I think that more than anything was what interested me about trying a return to the Masters of the Universe with this series. So let me talk about the story, the script, the pacing, that kind of thing, the general tone. First off, I don't think you have to have previous knowledge of these characters, this world, this franchise, but I would recommend it. However, since the 80s show might be unpleasant to watch for newcomers that have no nostalgia for it, I would recommend the mid-2000s He-Man and the Masters of the Universe short-lived animated series as a much better introduction. This show here, Revelation, is a sequel to the 80s show, so it ignores the events of the mid-2000s show. But that 2000s show provides, I think, valuable introductions to all the key players, which this series really doesn't bother with. And so even having that basic background knowledge on these admittedly very simplistic characters certainly helped me to be invested to some degree from the start, certainly more so than I would have been otherwise. It starts with a tone that seemingly is very geared toward kids. It's overly bright, cheesy dialogue, character designs that are almost directly replicating the 80s toy line, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be up for this, But that was about the first 15, 20 minutes of that first episode, and then there's a major game changer that happens that changes the whole world, and then also we jump forward in the timeline. I'm assuming at least some number of years. They don't specify how many, but it's got to be, years, at least maybe 1, 2 years or more. The main series then takes place in this sort of aftermath version of this familiar Masters of the Universe world, with only flashbacks here and there to that more innocent and simple past time period. Each of the 5 season 1 episodes, yeah, it is a little short for what I would typically want, but each of the 5 episodes has its own sort of main goal. I don't want to say main story because they're all feeding into very strongly the main overarching plot of the first season. So I watched it all in one sitting, and that actually felt very appropriate, although I think it can function well watching an episode every now and then also. There's plenty of action, but also many moments given to character development, introducing complexity to many of these characters and their motives that before now, at least in the 80s series, were just super simplistic. It doesn't have enough dramatic weight to feel geared only toward adults, but there was enough of that to keep me interested, and I really need that. I can't just sit down and watch just a straight up kids show. Also, there are lots of wild and imaginative ideas, the kinds of things I would want to see in this setting that I, as I mentioned, really like for its blend of genres. There's a variety of monsters, magic, technology that reminded me of really what I liked about this world and why I wanted to give it a chance returning to it. Tila is really the main character of this season, which is maybe, they wanted to have the flexibility to focus from season to season on different characters. I don't know, but it's notable that it's not called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It's just called Masters of the Universe Revelation, and that's very appropriate, and this season is largely about Tila. It's certainly an ensemble cast, but she is the main character of this season. And she really epitomizes, I think, what they seemed to be trying to do with all the characters, namely to flesh them out to be far more than the simplistic fantasy characters appealing to young boys. I mean, the backstory for all these characters was probably pretty simplistic, even in the minds of the writers. I don't know, but from what I remember of the original 80s series, it's just like they're just stereotypical archetypes for mashing toys together and just giving some kind of context for mashing these toys together. There's not much more than that. Maybe in fiction that has come since then, or that is part of the canon. I don't know. I'm not that big of a fan to know kind of what maybe comic books and stuff or novels, who knows what is out there that would be considered canon. But just based on the 80s series, which this is meant to be a sequel series too, as the description reads, it must have been pretty simplistic, and it felt that way in those first 15 minutes. And then suddenly they start introducing background elements and for all these characters, and especially Tila, and just kind of getting into her motives. She's a strong, capable, and I think relatably motivated character. Essentially, they start by saying, yes, all the stuff that came before in the 80s animated series counts, or in the comic books that came with each action figure. Remember those? I really loved those. But now we're allowing these characters to think about and react to elements of these characters that we took for granted as kids, that we didn't question, but are well worth questioning as adults. Probably the main one that's the centerpiece for some drama in this is the secret identity of Adam, where he is actually He-Man, but nobody's really, well, not nobody, there's some people that are aware. Tila was not aware, and so that secret having been kept from Tila is a major part of kind of her dramatic arc through this. I mean, it's the center of her dramatic arc through this whole season. And as kids, we just take it for granted. Oh yeah, he's kind of like a superhero. He's got a secret identity, and we don't ask about any of the social ramifications of someone having a secret identity when you're just like a preteen elementary age kid bashing your action figures together. So I appreciated that they explored these things that kids would take for granted. I love how they progressed a number of characters, forcing good guys and bad guys to work alongside each other and show that the good guys are all flawed in some ways, and the bad guys, Evil Lynn in particular, have some relatable traits that actually made me feel sympathy for them and root for them, maybe even in some ways. So I look forward to the potential complexity of Evil Lynn's character in a second season, and the other complexities that might show up in other characters. They also progressed some characters, one in particular, I won't say who, and gave them a moment that I was like, yes, that's the kind of moment I want this character to have, and so it was just neat to see some of those kinds of things happen, and also new twists and character background elements that I never would have assumed would be part of the original intent, probably weren't, but were very welcome to me in fleshing these characters out. It's worth noting the season ends on a cliffhanger, so avoid it for now if that would be a turnoff. But if not, then, yeah. At least you're somewhat psychologically prepared for it. Okay, I'm going to have to wait for resolution on this. Okay, let's talk about the cast just briefly. It's ironically made up of a lot of what I would say are familiar faces, but perhaps not names. Some TV actors, or maybe some actors that are more known as supporting roles in big films and stuff. So faces you would probably recognize many of, but maybe not necessarily their names. Mark Hamill and Lena Headey as Skeletor and Eva Lynn, respectively, are probably the most notable names to me. I actually recognized Lena Headey's voice. I'd forgotten. I knew at one point she was in it, but I forgot in the lead up to it. And then when I heard her voice, like, oh, that's Lena. Oh, yeah, that's right. She was cast in this, and stuff. So Mark Hamill was the one I had concerns about going in. I saw, some clips leading into it. I was like, ugh. He's doing kind of like the modified Joker thing. He's not laughing, but it's very similar. He has this kind of villain voice that he does, and yes, his voice has changed over the years because he's just put it through so much. It's like putting his voice through a cheese grater so much when he's playing that Joker character over decades that it is rougher and lower than it was when he was playing that character for the Batman 90s animated series. So his voice is transformed enough that I feel like it's not just the Joker voice. But even so, it just stands out to me as like, yep, that's Mark Hamill doing one of his sinister villain voices that largely sound the same to me. However, I adjusted and adapted and grew to accept his voice, and then also Skeletor is not featured nearly as much in this season as you might suspect going into it. And so I think that at the end of the day, it was not a point of distraction for me that I really honestly thought it was going to be. I still prefer, I think, the voice performance of the guy whoever played him in the mid-2000s animated series. I don't have any other comments except as far as voice acting, except that all felt pretty fitting, not overdone, as I think they easily could have been, and they all worked within the tone of serious yet still cartoony, and I think that's probably what they're going for. As far as the visuals go, I did have trouble with the adherence to the 80s toy design aesthetic, especially how true they were to that aesthetic, not just early on. After the big event, I do have to say, characters often reappeared with updated looks that incorporated more browns, more grays, more scars, and other kind of little details that made them a little more grounded or gritty or just kind of grown up in a sense, less Saturday morning and maybe more Friday night, I don't know. I didn't quite get the full grown-up redesign I would have liked. I mean, if I were to have my druthers, whatever those are, this would have been a full-on for grown-ups animated series, and it would have lots of blood and the stuff that they never could have gotten away with. It wouldn't be making any concessions for a younger audience. That's what I would want. I understand why they didn't do that. Business-wise, it's a much wiser move probably for them to have not done that. And I am content with the compromise that they seem to arrive at with the visual designs. The animation, I think, is really solid quality, and I never really felt like they cut corners in some scenes, like such as dialogue. It's like, okay, let's make the dialogue really simple, not have characters move very much at all, so we can really have our teams spend all their time on the big action scenes. No, I mean, I thought the big action scenes looked great and had all kinds of cool stuff going on, but I felt like the dialogue scenes were really good too. That seemed to be a priority, which I appreciate. As I said, they do lean into some dramatic elements and character elements, and good animation can be really helpful in those kinds of scenes, and so it seemed in general to get the money applied to it that I would want. So I hope that the design updates keep coming, and I feel like this is a really good starting point at the very least, especially for fans who maybe don't want too much change. This is they in general, I think in many respects say, yeah, no, what came before counts. Maybe some fans wouldn't want to jump straight to the updates and straight to a complete reboot and a retelling of the origin. But I think they're straddling both worlds pretty well here and saying, no, here, this is what you remember, and now we're going to grow it up in phases, and we're going to darken it up in phases and make it complex in terms of the characters in phases. That's my hope. My hope would be it would, throughout however long this series lasts, be progressively heading towards something that is more mature and more grounded and more adult oriented. I probably won't get that as much as I want because, again, I think they're trying to find a new audience of kids that will maybe buy more action figures or something. I don't know. Okay, themes. Is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, each episode seems to have its own light themes, some that surface more strongly than others. There's the idea of found family. In other words, valuing the family that you kind of, people that you consider quote-unquote family that really are not your biological family, nor even your formally adopted family, but like acquaintances, friends that grow into these really deep, strong relationships that you think of as family. And that's an interesting phenomenon in itself. I could make some comments about, but I won't right now. There's themes of overcoming the difficulties of your upbringing and parents who did not support you and in fact did the opposite. One character struggling with that. There's the idea of reconciling with your blood family, and there's even an opportunity, I think, to talk about the idea of heaven that's often perpetuated in fiction. But the overarching and possibly unifying theme seems to be dealing with the past, or specifically hurts or regrets of the past. It's a series that seems thematically aimed at children of the 80s who are now older and grappling with the fact that life has not turned out like they'd hoped, and that the world is not the simplistic place that it seemed to be as a kid. I think that's kind of like an undercurrent and maybe an underlying theme that's consistent throughout the creation of the whole season. I think the mileage is definitely going to vary depending on the individual viewer, but the seeds are there for some worthwhile thought and conversation. All right, I have no idea what your tastes are in animation or TV shows or anything like that, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter. Okay, so this one's not worth a month of Netflix on its own, but check it out when you have a backlog of things on Netflix that you want to watch or to check out. You might even only enjoy this one while multitasking instead of giving it your full attention, but it has enough moments to make it worth your time to watch in some way at some point. Maybe when the whole series is done and given proper resolution would be a good time to pull the trigger and binge the whole thing. This one is rated TVPG for fear and gore, and those are all my thoughts for now on Masters of the Universe Revelation Season 1. I would love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. For more info about the benefits of being an insider, go to patreon.com/SpiritBlade Productions. Then I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Hey, I wanted to let you know there are some dates below in the description of some live events coming up that you may not want to miss. And also, while I have your attention, check out my playlists to see some content that maybe you missed already that you'll be glad you found. That's all.